So the month of March, I read so many great books, so many five-star reads that I actually had to include my rating system in that video because I didn't want everyone to think that, oh, he just gives 5 stars to everything. Well, the month of April will prove that I don't just give 5 stars to everything. Well, hello everyone and welcome to my April book roundup. I'm going to share with you the 8 books that I read this month. Not quite the high ratings that we had in March, but I did read some very good ones that I think a lot of you will enjoy. If you're new to my monthly wrap-ups, I will group everything by genre and put chapters below, so if you want to skip a certain genre or skip to a certain genre, feel free to do so. But I always save my book of the month for last, and much like February, this one was a big surprise. So let's start with an audiobook that I listened to this month, a thriller by Bentley Little called Dispatch. I don't do very many audio, but I actually had 3 quite long road trips last month, and I finished 2 audiobooks, the first of which was Dispatch by Bentley Little. And this was a great thriller that was recommended by Stephen King, and I mostly enjoyed it. But my biggest issue with this one is that I hated the main character. Now, it's a first-person narrative, which works really well in an audiobook because it feels, with the first-person narrative, it feels like the person's just telling you the story. But the narrator was kind of a psychopath, and throughout the book, whenever misfortune would fall upon him, I kind of said, well, that's what you get. So it was really hard to love a book where I didn't like the main protagonist. But it had all the great attributes of a great thriller. Very fast-paced, very inventive, a good supernatural horror element to it as well. It's essentially kind of a coming-of-age tale about a boy who discovers that through the written word, he has the power to influence people. And sometimes that manifests itself in personal things. Sometimes it's political things, and sometimes it's just the mundane, writing to a restaurant to get free meals. But it evolves into something much, much more than that. I didn't feel that the ending was satisfactory to my mind. I enjoyed the ride. I never thought I was going to DNF it or anything, but I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as I had thought, but I did like it overall. So I gave Dispatch by Bentley Little a 3 out of 5. Next up, a work of science fiction, kind of, and that is The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher. Now, it's kind of more of a sci-fantasy, that's why I say kind of. It's a bit of steampunk, there's some magic in there. This is a book that I already did a dual review. I reviewed this one and another one I'll talk about in a minute, and talked about this one quite a bit. I probably could have done a full review on this one. This is the first Jim Butcher book that I've liked. I've read the first 2 Dresden Files books before this, and I wasn't a huge fan. I enjoyed the world-building aspects of those 2 books, and that's why I'll continue to read Dresden. But the world-building here is fantastic. Mankind lives in these spires in the sky, and these aeronauts fly these ships from spire to spire, and there's these noble houses, and this had some really great characters. The thing that I enjoyed most about this is this was really fast-paced, and just the plotting and pacing was superb for such a big book. I mean, it's pretty chunky. I finished it very quickly, like 3 or 4 days, and it definitely makes me want to read more Jim Butcher. But if you want to hear me talk more about The Aeronaut's Windlass, check out that dual review. I'll link it in the description below. But I gave The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher a 4 out of 5. I read 2 works of classic fantasy this month, one of which was The King Beyond the Gate by David Gemmell. If you saw, I think it was my January book reviews, I had read Legend by David Gemmell, and it absolutely blew me away. I said it was the piece of heroic fantasy that I didn't realize I needed in my life. And I love the writing, I love the themes, I loved everything about it. In fact, after finishing Legend, I put everything by David Gemmell on my TBR. Well, this was the follow-up. Unfortunately, when I wrote my review for this, I compared this to a Hollywood sequel that just tries to recreate the magic and fails, because that's mostly what this did. I still liked a lot of it because I do like the writing. Find out afterwards that the publisher made him put this book out second. He had a different book that he had written, and the publisher wanted more of the same, like Legend. So a lot of the story beats and trajectory of the story is very similar to that one. and it's a bit of a retread, unfortunately. I still liked a lot of it. It doesn't dampen my enthusiasm for Gemmel. I do have another one on the shelf I bought already just for whenever I can fit it in. But overall, The King Beyond the Gate is not up to the level of Legend, and I gave it a 3 out of 5. The other work of classic fantasy I read this month is The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. This is the 4th book in the Chronicles of Narnia. And this is one that I had different feelings at different times of reading it. I felt it was very slow at the start, which is rare for a book that it's not very big and it's pretty quick to read. I think I read almost 100 pages an hour with these books. But it felt slow, it felt a bit meandering. But the last third of this book was superb. Maybe not up to the level of the ending of like Dawn Treader, but very, very good. And when I was thinking back upon this when I finished it, I asked myself, why didn't I like it as much as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe or The Voyage of the Dawn Treader? And I realized one of my characters that I think is the most important in the series was missing, and that's Lucy. I feel that the youngest of the children that we first meet in the first book is kind of the heart of these books, and having her absent in The Silver Chair, it was just an absence that when I look back, I realized that was one of the issues I had with this book. But the plot did meander, even though the last third was fantastic. But having Cousin Eustace and his classmate Jill just didn't make up for the lack of the kids from the original. But I still liked it overall, and I did give The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis a 3 out of 5. I read 3 works of modern fantasy this month, starting with The Way of Edan by Philip Chase. Now, I already filmed a full dedicated review, so if you want to check out my thoughts on this one, this, of course, is the first of a trilogy, which is all coming out this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I don't shoot that many dedicated reviews. Please check it out, because those take a little bit more effort than these kind of wrap-ups, and it seems like people don't watch them as much. But I really enjoyed this. What I enjoyed most was the world building and Chase's prose. I just love the writing style. And the world building was very detailed. And the one thing I said in that review that I will echo here is this just feels, it does not feel like a debut. It feels like a very polished effort from an established author. And I thoroughly enjoyed The Way of Edan. Go check out that review. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Another work of modern fantasy that I read this month is Curse of the Fallen by H.C. Newell. I actually had the opportunity to talk with the author on the channel. If you want to check out that video, it's another one I'll link in the description below. This is a beginning of a series, and what a beginning. This reminded me of The First Law, how it started, and you're in the middle of an action sequence, because this does the same thing. It does slow down at times in a good way to establish character, but I really enjoyed the world that she creates in this book. Has some very memorable characters. One of the things I really enjoyed in this is she has a different way of presenting elves in this story. So I love seeing elves. Actually, there were elves in The Way of Edan, which I didn't talk about, but I love seeing the classic races of fantasy, but done in a different manner. Curse of the Fallen is a work of grimdark fantasy, so if you're not a fan of that subgenre, this might not be the book for you, but very modern voice, very, very strong debut. I gave Curse of the Fallen a 4 out of 5. And the last work of modern fantasy that I'll talk about is The City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Would you look at this cover? This is just a gorgeous book. So this was the other half of that dual review that I shot with The Aeronaut's Windlass. So if you want to hear me talk about this book at length, I did quite a bit, about 8 or 9 minutes talking about this book. This was my first by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and certainly not my last. I hear that his books are all very different, so I love when authors do that. I mean, I love how Dan Simmons does that with his works, how things are very, very different from book to book. But this reminded me of a 19th century novel, because each chapter was almost self-contained. And we had these kind of vignettes about this city who's under this oppressive rule. And you can see the simmering, and there's a slow boil where there's just a rebellion or a revolution about to explode in this city. And seeing it from the different parts and the way he wrote it, I really enjoyed it. It's a book that is pretty slow paced, but if you appreciate that when it's done well like I do, this might be a book for you. Again, go check out that video, the dual review. Again, the single reviews and the dual reviews don't get as much traction on BookTube for some reason, but I really enjoyed this book, and I think for the certain kind of reader, if you're like me, you're really going to enjoy this one as well. I give The City of Last Chances a 4 out of 5. And my book of the month was a memoir and an audiobook. Second time that's happened to me this year. And the reason it happened is because I was telling some friends of mine about the memoir that I listened to, and they recommended this to me. And the book of the month is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of knew who Trevor Noah was. I knew he had taken over The Daily Show, but I'm not a big TV watcher, so I've never really watched him on that show. I think he was a comedian before that, and from reading it, it seems like that's what it is. But this is really about his childhood and growing up in South Africa. And this memoir, I'll be honest, taught me more about apartheid than anything I've ever experienced. I guess my schooling didn't teach me a whole lot about it, and maybe at the time of Mandela and all of this, I wasn't a big news watcher or newspaper reader, but I learned quite a bit about what life was like, at least anecdotally, in South Africa at the time. Born a Crime refers to the fact that he is mixed race, which is illegal at the time, and the narrative, it's incredible. I mean, it's times moving, tragic, hilarious. Some of these stories are just etched into my brain that he tells you. And his own personal narrative, his delivery is just top notch. He can do characters very well. He does accents very well. There are, I think, more than a dozen languages with different dialects spoken in South Africa. So when he was creating different characters from his past, he brought them to life in such a great way. I'm sure this is a book that's great to read with your eyes, but I thoroughly enjoyed it as an audiobook as well. Definitely probably a top 10 memoir that I've read in my lifetime. So my book of the month for April 2023 is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, 5 stars. Well, this wrap-up was a little quicker than most months because I had already done some reviews of those other books. If you want to check out Aeronaut's Windless and City of Last Chances, the dual review, or the review of The Way of Edan, click the description below, or the interview with H.C. Newell, I have that down there as well. I would love to hear what you read last month, what your best book in April was, and of course, if you've read any of these, I'd love to hear that. And maybe one more topic. If you know of some great memoirs that work as an audiobook, let me know, because I've read 2 great ones this year and I'd love to listen to a few more. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.